Live Q&A with Michael Dante DiMartino, co-creator of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and a new author of the new book, Rebel Genius, which is awesome. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Mike.
All right, thanks. I'm excited to talk about my book.
So what would you hope that people take away or go into your book thinking? Obviously everybody knows you from Avatar and you've been such a great presence online. So what do you hope that they start the book thinking about you and looking forward to reading?
Well, I hope they have an open mind. I think in the past, we've had this experience on Avatar and then going to Korra where sometimes people have a preconceived notion of what the next project should be or what they expect it to be. And often at first, when they heard about Korra, they were like, no, we just want more Aang or we want more Zuko. And they were kind of, not everyone, of course, but we definitely heard some rumblings of we want some more Aang. And it was but then once Korra was out, everyone enjoyed it. And now they love Korra. And so, I get a lot now where it's yeah, that's cool you're doing a book, but make more Avatar. And, yeah, that's fine, but, I want to try different things and explore different worlds and tell different stories and stuff. So, but I think people will not be, it's not so vastly different than the work I've done before. It's still kids on an adventure, fantasy world, it's just a new world, new characters, and different slightly different tone. It's not as there's definitely humor in it, but it's not as jokey as Avatar was. But still got that same sense of high stakes adventure and lots of myth building and world building and that sort of thing.
Awesome. Yeah, I actually wanted to ask you about that because it is obviously one of the things that drew people into Avatar so much was the really deep, detailed, rich world building. And I was in Hawaii this summer actually, and I saw the 7 sacred pools, and I was like, I'm a guru. So, it was very fun. But I also, I'm wondering how you started coming up with the idea of geniuses and setting Giacomo's story in a world that's very much inspired by one of our own historical, legendary creative periods.
Yeah, when I think of art and the nexus of art flourishing and stuff, I always think of the Renaissance, and it was just such a vibrant period. And characters like Leonardo da Vinci are kind of almost mythological at this point. So and I also wanted to do something that I'm half Italian, so I've always wanted to do something that was set that had an Italian backstory or culture involved in it. So that was part of the inspiration as well. And then as far as the geniuses, that was kind of an idea that came later in the development. I knew I wanted to have art as a kind of a magic. Mm-hmm. And artists doing magic in the world, but I didn't know what that would look like exactly. How could I visualize that? And then I was reading about Leonardo da Vinci and the Renaissance and that time period, and how geniuses were believed to be spirits, and nobody called Leonardo da Vinci a genius back in the Renaissance. They would have said he has a genius, or this certain city was protected by a genius. And I was somehow that idea sparked the idea of these bird geniuses in the book. And they're kind of the physical embodiment of the artist's creative spirit. And using their genius, they're able to manifest these kind of magical attacks, but also use them for healing. So it's kind of they're tapping into a universal energy.
Mm-hmm. That's cool.
Yeah.
So it's definitely very much inspired by kind of real historical perceptions of art. That's really awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you find any similarities when you were crafting the world between, I guess, obviously Avatar is also based on kind of philosophies that we have in our own world. So did you have any sense of deja vu or draw any inspiration from the world building you've done on Avatar and Korra?
I think so. And then I was also looking more at because a lot of that was kind of Eastern thought and Eastern philosophies, and I started trying to look at like Western philosophies at the time and Western esoteric thought and stuff like that. So I was like the philosophy of humanism at the time, which was kind of putting the individual above like God and religion, and the artists taking that upon themselves to like explore and question and study human anatomy, and everything was starting to become more about like the self and not the God, I guess. And so that was part of it. But I still draw on like a lot of the kind of influences we had on Avatar as well.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And we're getting some awesome questions from people, but I just want to ask you first, how did you go about creating Giacomo as a character? I mean, he kind of in a way feels like a familiar middle grade kind of protagonist, but he also has a lot of depth that isn't maybe that comes out through the book. So what was your journey like crafting that character?
Cool, thanks. Yeah, he's kind of, he's probably the most like me when I was that age. Because when he starts out, he's just drawing all the time, and that's what I did when I was a kid. And kind of writing this book was like a way to give myself the book I really wanted when I was that age as a young artist, and there weren't that many books about art, at least in like a fictional fantasy type setting. So that was part of the inspiration. And then as far as his character, I mean, there's a lot of like the trope of like the orphan kid. And I used to have a whole version of the story where he was actually at an orphanage and all this stuff. And I was trying to avoid the usual like fantasy,
The Oliver Twist,
which is like so impossible to like. It's like either you have the parents there and you can't do anything in the story because you're like, well, the parents are still there, so why would he do any of this stuff? Or the parents have to be dead, and why are they dead? So I tried to flesh out his backstory and tie it into the leader of the city called Varenzia, and she's kind of like a dictator person who was responsible in a way for the death of his parents. So he has a bit of a personal grudge against her.
Mm. Yeah, that's true. And I was really happy to see that the kind of the main villain is a lady, and she's like super scary. And, yeah.
Very lady.
Yeah. So one of our first questions comes from someone on Twitter called Hetarikia. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your Twitter handle wrong. But they say, hello, Mike. How did you pick the type of birds that appear in the book?
Wow, good question. So all the geniuses take different forms, or different types of birds. So we have like one of the bad guys has this giant eagle genius, and Giacomo has like a cute little hummingbird. I mean, I was kind of trying to match the birds with the personalities of the artists. So there's another character named Milena, and she's very graceful and smart and very meticulous painter. And her genius is like a graceful crane. And Savina, who's kind of a bit more of a tough guy, he's got this, it's like it's like a falcon. And then Amina, who's kind of the sweet, more naive one of the bunch, she has a really cute little robin, like kind of like a big puffball of feathers. So I wanted to match it kind of to the idea too is like the geniuses would manifest their personalities a bit, kind of the way like I have a dog, and a lot of times dogs sort of like take on the personality of their owners, I think, or vice versa. I don't know. So just that kind of relationship between like a human and an animal, mirroring each other's personalities.
Which is also a familiar theme from Avatar. I mean,
we had cute animals. People love the cute animals.
Yeah. I may or may not have a Pabu plush.
Yes. I have my Naga right over. I got Appa and Naga right here.
Oh, awesome. Nice. well, same person, also asks, in the book you mentioned that other countries' geniuses take different forms. So she or he asks, for the cat geniuses in Katunga, would they be all types of cats, like lions and tigers, or just domestic cats? So could they kill you, or would they just be like...
Yeah, whoever this is, they're jumping ahead. This is like book 3. My idea right now, don't hold me to this because I still haven't worked it all out. But yeah, it would be different, not just house cats, like different kinds of cats, because there's a lot of cool, like lions and, I don't know, lynxes and panthers and all those kind of great cats. So that's what I'm thinking for those guys.
I just learned that hyenas are part of the cat family, which I didn't realize because that was my Patronus.
I guess they were maybe more like coyote, but
yeah.
All right.
I know. I always thought they were dogs, but apparently they're not. I don't know.
All right. I'll have to research them, so maybe they can make it.
Nice. So we have another question from someone who has a very relevant Twitter account name, which is Avatar/LOK comic fan. And they ask, when writing a trilogy, how pinned down do you prefer to get to the later parts of the series before starting the first one? So I think, we're talking about plotting and viewing, the whole story.
That is also a good question. I tend to leave it pretty loose. I mean, I definitely have an idea of like what the whole, like when I pitched this book to the publisher and my editor, like I had a plan for the other, book 2 and book 3, but they were very, very loose. It was like, I know the general, vibe of what's going to happen. Like they're going to go to this place and they're on a quest to find this thing. So, I mean, the whole structure of the book is of the series is around finding these 3 sacred tools, which are like called the Creator's Compass, Creator's Straight Edge, and the Creator's Ruler. And the idea is Straight Edge and then Pencil. And the idea is there are these tools that are believed to have brought the world into being. So they have enormous creative or destructive power. So it's definitely a quest story where each book they're going to try to find one of these objects. So I have that kind of arc in mind, but I did definitely leave it open because I'm writing the second one now, and once I finally got to it, there's a lot of stuff to work out and figure out, even though I had the overall structure of what I thought I wanted to happen, but then you have to actually work out like how it dramatically will unfold. And then once, after writing the first book, I really got to know the characters more and what I really liked and what didn't work, and realizing I had way too many characters. How do I make them all have interesting stories in the second book? So it's been challenging.
Yeah, it is a big crew. There's definitely, I mean, I'm curious, like who, you said that you relate a lot to Giacomo, but which character do you think did you enjoy writing most? Like I really related to Milena a lot.
Cool, yeah.
And but Amina also is like so cute and hard.
I had fun. I really liked writing. So there's chapters from Giacomo's point of view, and then there's other chapters from this character named Zenobius, and he's called a tulpa, and he's basically a living statue and created by this rogue artist guy. So he's kind of like one of the antagonists of the story, but he's got a complicated backstory with his master guy. So I really liked writing his character. I found his chapters kind of easier to write because he's kind of a conflicted character. So he's doing these kind of terrible things, but he secretly wants to do the right thing, and you're kind of rooting for him a little bit to break out of his master's control, I guess.
Yeah, I love Zenobius. Like
cool.
I think he's actually more my favorite than Milena, just because he's so different, and he's I don't know how did you were you surprised at all by the way he developed, or did you kind of know from the beginning that he was going to have this very conflicted arc? Because while reading the book, it's kind of like he has kind of infinite possibilities as to where he's going to go, and it's like super satisfying, and of course kind of heartbreaking sometimes to see what actually happened.
Yeah, he kind of, well, you start out and it's kind of like a Jason Bourne thing where he like wakes up and, like, kind of got he remembers certain things but not everything. So you're wondering like what's going on here with his memory and why does he not remember what just happened, and it's kind of weird. And so it is a bit of a mystery about like unfolding like what his relationship is with the guy who created him, and even though he is this like created being, he definitely has a soul and the consciousness, and he's kind of trying to fight to free his consciousness.
Yeah, and it's definitely one of my favorite parts of the book. So Ashley asks, can you talk a little bit about sacred geometry and why you decided to include that in the story?
Oh, these are great questions. So the sacred geometry part, that also came through the research when I was trying to figure out what the magic in this world was going to be like, what it would look like, how could I visualize it and describe it in a dynamic way. Because I was, comparing it to Avatar, it's like we had the Kung Fu, and that was a very clear visual thing. You can draw, you can demonstrate, you can see water shooting at people and fire shooting, and it's a very clear visual thing. And I was like, I need something that can be as cool as that. Like, what's going to be the magic of this world? And I had always I knew kind of about sacred geometry. It's basically the idea is that there's these kind of underlying patterns throughout the universe, and the numbers 1 through 10 correspond to different shapes. So, for example, like in the first book, I kind of deal with the numbers 1 through 3, and number 1 corresponds to the circle. Number 2 is a line. Number 3 corresponds to a triangle. And so Giacomo kind of like learns how to create those shapes through sacred geometry drawings that are based on real art. I don't know how to describe it. So, but it's these principles that are used not just in art, but in music, architecture, and nature. You can find these different patterns all through nature. So it's kind of a cool thing. And through the book, Giacomo kind of discovers, like, he starts to see these patterns underlying everything and starts to understand more about how interconnected the world is. So it's a really cool, if people are more interested in it, like, I'm not an expert by any means, but there's a lot of great, I use this one book, actually I have it right here. I'll plug this book. It's called The Beginner's Guide to Constructing the Universe. I use this book every day because it's all about sacred geometry and kind of gives examples of, like, in the real world, the different shapes and the numbers and how they correspond to each other. So anyway, I took that idea, and in the book, when artists, they can, almost like a wand or something, if they have a pencil or a paintbrush. So they're doing something physical, but when they make that mark, it's kind of their genius projects that shape into so it's kind of like an energetic blast, and depending on their intention, they can use it to hurt someone or heal someone or create a bridge that goes across a chasm or create a wall or like a shield to protect themselves. So it has different applications, I guess.
Cool. Yeah, I was actually thinking there are a lot of scenes in the book, like with the bridge scene that feel very like I could almost see it as an animated story. I mean, obviously I'm thinking animation because of Korra, but yeah. Were you kind of, is that how you construct scenes in coming from this animation background, or are you more, or like when you were switching forms, were you like, all right, I'm gonna like do this physically and write, or the book has a ton of like awesome illustrations in it, so I guess I'm interested in how how those two work together for you.
Sure. As far as like the writing of the action scenes in a way, like they were definitely challenging because I'm so used to writing in a script where you're kind of describing the action, but it's, an awesome artist, storyboard artist, director is going to take that idea and flesh it out and make it beautiful, and they do all the hard work. And so writing prose action is definitely a challenge where you want to make it really clear and exciting and dynamic without getting bogged down in like a lot of description of like every minute detail of what's happening. And I think in my first draft I had a lot of extra description, and through the different drafts I definitely pared that down. But I think because of my background doing storyboards and directing and working on Avatar and Korra and everything, like I definitely think like visually and like how could I actually draw, if I had to draw this, could I actually like draw this clearly? And so a lot of times that was kind of my litmus test as far as like if it's clear or not. And then for the illustrations in the book, the idea behind those is that they're all drawings that the main character Giacomo does in his sketchbook throughout the story. So I wanted to not just have like kind of omniscient illustrations from an artist through the book. I wanted it to be like part of the story and give a little insight into the character. So
yeah, it makes the whole experience like kind of really synthesized. It's because you are talking about visual concepts in the book, so it really helps to communicate them like that. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, especially for all that, the sacred geometry stuff. I knew I was going to have to have visuals for that because it's even after I researched it all, I was like, it's hard to wrap your mind around if you don't. As soon as you see the shapes and how they're formed, you're like, oh, I get it. That's cool. Yeah. So I knew I definitely want to do that. And since it's a book about an artist and art, it just made sense that there would be an element of art to it. Yeah. I was really inspired. I love Brian Selznick's books. Have you seen those?
Oh, yeah.
Hugo Cabret and Wonderstruck, I think. Or Thunderstruck, and then there's The Wonders, I think was the latest one.
The Marvels.
Marvels.
Yeah.
I'm getting all the names wrong. Anyway, but I just love the way he tells stories with prose, and then the pictures take on the narrative as well. It's just like I was super inspired by his work. And then also I was looking at Miss Peregrine's for Peculiar Children, and I love the way that the photographs in those books like tied into the story and the character, and you would see a photo that the character was looking at, or the photo would just kind of evoke the mood of that scene. So those were kind of inspirations for the art also.
Awesome. So we actually have a question from our Hypable page from someone called World Builder who read the guest post that you did for us, which was beautiful, by the way. And they say, "Hi, Mr. DiMartino. Thanks for doing this Q&A. Big fan of both the shows and your new book. My question, is there anything you learned storytelling-wise besides accepting the resistance that you talk about in the Hypable article? Thank you so much and continue the great work."
I'm still learning tons of stuff writing the second book. I learned a lot writing the first one, and then I tried to apply it to the second one, and some of it worked, some of it didn't. It's kind of like you have to relearn the process every time. I work definitely with a plan, so I'm starting with like outlines and just kind of writing down what I want to happen in each scene, in each chapter, and that definitely works for me. I know some people can't work that way, but like if I don't have some kind of plan or plan of attack or what I'm doing, like I'd get super lost and especially with a novel, like even when I have the plan, it's very overwhelming because it's like such a big story. I need like kind of markers of like where I am in the story. And then, yeah, I don't know how what else to say about that, but yeah, there's this. I mean, I read like books about craft of writing a lot, and I just discovered this one called The Story Grid that's super helpful if people are looking for like structure help, and how to break down a novel. It's written by an editor with tons of experience and stuff, so it's like it comes at it from like a slightly different perspective than a lot of writing books. So, I mean, there's so many out there. Some are super helpful, some are not so helpful. That one I found has been helping me a lot. So,
yeah, I've heard it said that, the best way to be successful writing a book is to write a book about writing advice. And then,
apparently a lot of people do it. So,
so we have a question from Bram is Bored, who says, how different was writing a book compared to working on The Legend of Korra?
Good question. There's some similarities, but it's also definitely a different type of project. I mean, with Avatar, it was not just me. It was Brian, working with Brian, and then working with all these amazing artists and other writers and a whole overseas studio who do the animation and composers and sound designers. So it's like, it's such a huge undertaking, and like, a lot of my time was spent managing the show. And I mean, I was certainly doing writing and creative stuff as well, but like a lot of it ends up being like, you're the showrunner, so you have to kind of oversee all the different parts of the production, which is fun, but also I wanted to spend more time. I think at the times I was most excited was when we were in the writer's room coming up with ideas for the show and writing scripts and that kind of stuff, and doing storyboards, which I like doing. So I definitely don't miss that side of things, like the crazy production side of things. I miss all the awesome artists and working with all these great people. So when I transitioned into writing the book, yeah, it's very different. It's like, it's just me. And I have an editor who gives me notes periodically, but when you're in the middle of a book and you're stuck, you don't have anyone to talk to or bounce ideas off of. So it can be a little more lonely, but I don't mind working alone. So I kind of enjoy it at times. And then as far as the actual writing, kind of what I was talking about before, like even though we were doing like whole seasons of a show, doing it by episode, like it was kind of a more manageable amount of story to keep in your head at once. And I feel like writing novel is like, it's like trying to keep a whole season's worth of a show in your head at once, and it starts to get a little crazy, which is why I need a good plan of where everything was and tracking the characters and that sort of thing.
So you're definitely a plotter, not a pantser.
Yes.
Yeah.
If that's a thing. Yes.
In the YA parlance. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jeremy Ross has a question also about the geniuses. He says, I know the geniuses are bird-like. I think this ties back to maybe some of the other creatures that we might see. Are there other kinds of creatures in the world, and how powerful can they become?
You do see some other creatures, and I have more planned for the future. But yeah, the idea is they definitely live in a world where there's strange mythological beings out in the world. I mean, they're not so much in the, like, other than the geniuses, they're not in the like city parts, but once they get out into the journey and into these more remote areas, there's some weird creatures like these giant lizard chameleon creatures that are invisible, except Giacomo can see them at one point. So there's rumors of some other creatures out there that you're going to meet in the next book.
So teaser. Brittany Clevenger wants to know if you considered creating an animated series for Rebel Geniuses.
I don't know. I mean, I kind of want to try to make a movie out of it. Maybe we'll see. If anyone's interested.
I think people might
I
be
think just
interested.
because I've gone through the whole TV production thing before, I'm not as eager to jump back into that. But who knows? I'm kind of just focused on writing the books now, and we'll see where that stuff goes as it progresses.
Awesome. And Johanna Kirby wants to go way back and asks, when did you start drawing pictures, and have you always been interested in art?
Yeah, definitely the art thing came first before the writing. I was telling this story to someone last night. Like, I vividly recall being in, like, I think it was first or second grade, and we'd had like writing time. We were supposed to be writing stories, and I would always draw pictures instead. And to my teacher's credit, she, instead of getting mad at me and telling me to write a story, she gave me the idea. She was like, hey, you draw these cool pictures. You can write about the pictures you're drawing. Like, you can write about this character you're drawing. And I was like, oh, that's very interesting. I should try doing that. So I always think back on that, because I feel like that might have been a little light bulb that went off in my head about like mixing art and writing, and that's always kind of gone with me. Even when I went to art school, I got and then got into animation. I always wanted to combine the art and the writing and the storytelling in some way.
Cool. So I have a question, actually. I'm wondering, if you had a genius, what kind of bird would your genius be? And what would it look like?
That's a good question. I do really I think I probably picked hummingbird for Giacomo, because I just really love watching hummingbirds, and I see them out. I have a big window out here in my office, and sometimes they just hover outside the window, and I love seeing them. But eagles are cool. I like a good eagle. But the geniuses, even though they're based on real birds, like I was inspired by. I visited Bangkok years ago, and you see these images of Garuda everywhere, which is like this bird, kind of like human bird, mythological creature that is common in Buddhism. And I always loved that image, and I kind of drew a little bit from that into the geniuses too. So you'll see like they have crowns and earrings and ears. So they're mostly bird-like, but they have these few little kind of human details.
Yeah, they're very blinged out. I was very impressed by how they show up.
At one point, I imagined them having way more bling, but I was like, I
don't know. So speaking of Avatar, we got some awesome news yesterday that we finally know when the Legend of Korra continuation comic is coming out. It's called Turf Wars, and it's coming out in June. And you are writing it, right?
I am, yes. Much like the book, I just finished the second volume script, so I'm in the middle of writing that as well. Yeah. So I kind of been going back and forth. Like, I'll finish a draft of my book and then work on the script and then go back to my book. So it's been a good way to kind of bounce back and forth between the two projects.
Awesome. So what can you tell us about Turf Wars and what we can expect to see?
You can expect to see Korra and Asami in the spirit world, hanging out on their getting to know each other better. So yeah, it basically picks up like moments after the end of the season finale. So I knew we wanted to start, like, we didn't want to like jump ahead too far, because I felt like their relationship had just, it hadn't even really started. It was just the first moment of them realizing that they had feelings for each other, and wanted to explore like that first vacation away. So basically they're in the spirit world for a little while, and then they come back and have to deal with all the crap that's going on in Republic after the big battle that happened, and the new giant portal that's in the city, and all the evacuees who had to leave and are now coming back. And it's just kind of like a big mess in the city that Korra is like another thing she has to try to clean up and figure out how to deal with.
So welcome home, everything's terrible.
Yeah, kind of.
And well, speaking of Korra and Asami's relationship like drama and intrigue has been a big part of the series so far. So can we expect to see more like tension there, or I mean, because all good stories involve a certain amount of tension, or is it going to be happiness and roses for the two of them?
Yeah, it's that's been challenging to write because like you want it, because I know how much that relationship means to people, and I want to do it justice and celebrate it and have it be awesome. But if it is, like you say, if it is all just like, hey, everything's great, it's like, there's not much to write about. It's like, all right, cool, we're just hanging out. So yeah, they're in the early throes of a relationship. So like any relationship that's starting out, there's sometimes a few little bumps or whatever along the way. So nothing terrible, but they're still getting to know each other in a romantic way. So there's always a few awkward moments, maybe, I guess.
And what can we see? Can we look forward to seeing Mako and Bolin?
Yeah, I got a lot of Mako and Bolin in there. I had fun writing them. They're kind of now police partners on the force. So Beifong put together a special task force to deal with some problems in the city, and Bolin, since he didn't really have a job, signed on to be on this task force, and he and Mako are now partners, which leads to some exciting and humorous moments.
Very nice. And are we going to see any maybe carryover from like the finale, like Kuvira and her I mean, aside from the whole city is destroyed and there's a new spirit portal.
Yeah, there's the fallout from Kuvira, but I don't want to get people's hopes up. You don't see Kuvira in this particular story, but she's still around, so maybe someday.
Cool. So we have another question from Twitter from Grace, who asks, what is the most challenging thing about writing in this genre? Have you ever considered moving away from fantasy?
I've considered it. And then I always am like, I don't know, but I feel like it's kind of my natural place right now. But it's funny because I read some fantasy, but I read more like just like regular fiction books. I don't know, like Cormac McCarthy is one of my favorite writers, and
oh, that's cheerful.
Yeah, I know, like kind of stuff that people might not particularly associate with me. Like I didn't grow up reading fantasy novels or comics, so I don't really know how I got here. But now that I'm here, I really love this world. I think it came more through the like being interested in mythology and legends and that sort of thing, and how these, especially with like telling these children, even though they're quote unquote children's stories, like I just feel like you can get into much more depth and explore different stuff than you can in an adult novel sometimes. I don't know. Also, my sensibilities are more attuned to the younger, middle grade YA audience. I feel like I don't long to write, even though I love Game of Thrones, like I could never write that kind of like that kind of stuff. It's just not my personality or my natural instinct, I guess.
Yeah, I think you have to be specific to do that. We have a question from Gabriel, who wants to know what's the hardest part in making a cartoon or a book?
There's different challenges in both. With the animated series, it was just the amount of work that needed to be done in a short amount of time, and trying to keep the quality up really high, and managing all those people, and it's basically balancing the two sides of like the production side and then the creative side. So like the creative side of me wants to like spend forever on this episode and make it the best thing we've ever done in our lives. But then there's just the realities of like, we only have this many weeks and we have 10 other episodes that need attention. And so kind of balancing those two things can be challenging. The book, I think, is a different challenge because there's not as much, even though there were deadlines, they're not as like pressing as it was on the TV show. And it's just one thing that I was working on. Like it's just the book. So it's kind of hard to keep the enthusiasm and momentum sometimes because at least on Avatar and Korra, like if I got bored doing one part of the process, like inevitably an hour later we were in another meeting doing something else. So it was like always something different going on kind of. And with the book, it's like, it's just, especially when you're writing the long drafts, it's like, that's all you're working on. And so sometimes it just gets a little numbing. I need I guess like lack of variety sometimes. So it was fun doing the illustrations because that kind of, I would sometimes switch over to those if I needed a break from the writing.
Yeah, use a different part of your brain. Well, on a similar note, actually, Joanna Kirby asks if you've ever considered creating a graphic novel.
I mean, definitely writing the Korra novel, Korra graphic novels has been fun to do. And that's the first time I've written like specifically for comics. So maybe, I don't know yet. Possibly, I don't know. Yeah. I don't have any plans at the moment, but it's definitely a cool medium. And if I had an idea for a particular story that made the most sense to be done in that style, I would definitely look into it.
Nice. Matthews asks, this is a really interesting question. What is the most important subject in a story? Adventure, action, love, loyalty?
That is
it's a multiple choice question.
Most important. Wait, what was the word he used? What the most?
I think, yeah, he wants to know kind of, I guess maybe what you consider the most important like theme. Adventure, action, love, or loyalty, or fill in.
Yeah, I guess I would say like the adventure and action stuff is important, but it's kind of like it's the fun stuff that gets you through the story. And I feel like if you don't have an underlying emotional arc going on with the character or different characters, like you can only do so much action before it gets kind of tedious. Mm-hmm. So even in Rebel Genius, like there's definitely moments of action, but those are actually probably the shortest scenes. And then it's a lot of like what happens in between those big moments that develop the character and their relationships and kind of draw you emotionally more into the story. Because I feel like that's why you're reading stories. Like you want to have the fun stuff and the exciting moments and twists and surprises and all that's totally fun and exciting. But if you don't have like an emotional attachment to the characters or the what's going on with them, you probably won't make it through the whole story. So I don't know if that answered the question, but that's
yeah, no, I think so. Yeah, it's I mean, that's why people like Avatar, because I think we'll like Rebel Genius because it combines both of those elements really well. So we have two more questions. One is from Twitter. Britt Clev asks, speaking of the writing process, how do you get through writer's block? And what does your daily writing routine look like?
So yeah, daily writing routine when I'm working on the draft. I mean, I work a pretty normal, it's just because I'm used to working in an office on working on Avatar, Korra. So I kind of do the same thing. I get up 7. Well, now I get up earlier because I have kids, but like 9 to 5, 9 to 6, depending on how the day is going. But yeah, certain times I can only write, like do the actual like physical creative writing stuff for like maybe 3 or 4 hours, and then I kind of burn out. So like I try to save stuff that's like not super creatively intense for like later in the day. Like if I'm doing research or something like that, I'll try to like, I'll do that later on. And because I find that in the mornings I'm better at writing, or like it goes easier in the morning than at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon for me. So yeah, then I don't know. I think it's more, I don't really have writer's block, but it's like kind of the resistance thing I was talking about in that article. It's just, it's more like the voices that try to tell you not to, that what you're writing is terrible. And you have to try to like just try to ignore those voices as best you can and keep writing or take a break. And I have a dog, so I'll walk my dog, you know, just, and then come back to it a little later. And some days, you know, like after a couple hours, I'm just like, yeah, it's just not happening today. And I'll come back tomorrow and tackle it again. Cool. But I think it's like, I think partly, I guess the answer is like consistency. You know, you can't let like, even if you have a bum day, like it always happens, like you can't let that like not let you write for like 2 weeks, because it's really hard. It's like exercise or something. It's like, if you stop doing it, it's really hard to get back into it. But if you at least like are working on it in some sort of regular fashion, it's easier to keep up the momentum.
Awesome. Actually, we have one or two more. Sorry. Anthony asks, how do you come up with your character choices, personalities, names, and attributes? And what do you think makes a character relatable to people?
Well, I mean, for the characters, it's just trying to get like different personalities that will play off each other in an interesting way. So, for example, like one of the things I ran into with the first book was the two girl characters, Milena and Amina. Like my first draft, they were very similar kind of in personality. It was just because I hadn't like really honed in on like who they were. So they were sounding kind of similar and doing similar things. And it was like, are these two different characters, or could they be combined into one character? But ultimately I was able to like hone in on their different personalities and what made them individuals, and kind of make that clearer, I guess. So it's definitely, yeah, trying to get like sometimes characters are created because there's a need in the story for that certain character. They have a certain role to play. Like Pietro, who's the mentor figure, it's like that kind of archetype. It's like I knew there was going to be some kind of artist that Giacomo needed to learn from, and figuring out who this guy was and what his personality was going to be came out of like a story need, that I needed this role to be filled, sort of. And then with the kid characters, it was also to show, because I think Amina wasn't part of the original group when I first was creating the story, but I wanted to show that like it wasn't just visual artist, she's a musician. So I wanted to have a character who was awesome at playing different instruments, and you could show how musicians could also have geniuses. Because my idea is like, in that city at a certain point, you know, people who are writers or dancers or actors also had geniuses. We don't see them in this particular story. But
oh, cool. So get on that, fan fiction writers. And Jemmy asks, what are your thoughts on the balance? This is a heavy question. So what are your thoughts on the balance between prioritizing commercial success and literary value when writing a novel? What do you value?
I mean, I value just telling a good story, I guess, first and foremost. Like, even with Avatar way back in the day, like, we had no idea that was going to take off and that people were still going to be watching it 10 years, 12 years later. We were just trying to make a really cool 10-minute pilot episode. Like, that's how it started, you know? And it was just like, what's the best version of this story we could tell? Yeah, and with the book, it's like, I mean, there's a certain consideration as far as like, well, I have to make a living, and I want to make a living being a writer, so I got to write something that people want to read. and I think the experience of Avatar and Korra, I kind of, I wasn't gonna like venture off and do something like so different that people who liked Avatar and Korra would be like, I have no interest in reading this. So, but I wanted to try something new creatively, and writing a novel was a new challenge. So yeah, but like if my whole consideration was like, I'm going to try to make as much money and be as commercially successful as possible. Like, you can never plan that. Who knows? I don't, this book might take off and be popular, or it might not, and that's okay too. Like, it's been an awesome experience, and it was just my goal to like tell this story and get it out in the world, and then it's out of my hands. It's like it's in other people's hands now. They're either gonna connect with it and enjoy it, or maybe not. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. All right, great. So just one last question, which I think is a nice way to end. Cyan asks, what's your favorite memory of your time on Avatar?
Oh, that's very nice. I mean, I think it is like just the memories of like working with all the different people, and like traveling to Korea and meeting all the artists at studio. Well, it was different studios over the year, but kind of like making these friends that like we all have this connection now that is going to last our lifetimes. Like, even there's people in Korea who, when I had my twins, like, they sent us baby clothes, and it's like, it's so nice. It's like, it's amazing. I never would have thought, I wouldn't have expected that, and it's just like amazing that these connections have kind of like stayed all this time. And so I think, yeah, beyond, it was hard work and stuff, but like you kind of forget about all that stuff, and you remember the good times and all the really talented people. And it's also just been amazing to see like everyone's careers like blossom and take off, and what everyone's doing now. And so yeah.
Awesome. Terrific. So thank you everyone who joined us for our live Q&A with Michael Dante DiMartino. And thank you so much, Mike, for joining us. Guys, remember, you can pick up Rebel Genius now.
Go check it out.
That's a genius right there. That's a Giacomo right there. It's an awesome book. Go get it. And yeah, check out our other stuff on Hypable.com. Check out Mike's Tumblr, and we will, there's fun stuff ahead. Bye, everyone.
All right, thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.